Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of DABCC Live. We're excited about this webinar, as always, because we have a great vendor with us today. We have VMTurbo with us, and they're going to show us their real-time virtualization management solution. And this is some neat stuff because it's real-time. And I've always loved real-time stuff because, you know, it's real-time. This is when there's a problem, you want to know where the problem is happening now, not in the future, or if we're looking, what have you, right? So I won't steal these guys' thunder. I'll turn it over to them. And so with no further ado, we have Ilya Merman with us, and then also Philip Thomas, too. And these guys are going to take us through the VMTurbo solution. So Ilya, it's all yours.
Thanks, Doug. You are muted. I'm unmuted. Thanks, Doug. So yeah, today we'll talk about virtualizing mission-critical applications. The agenda for today, we'll spend a little time talking about what we're calling the virtualization chasm. This is the gap between virtualizing the low-hanging fruit, the easy-to-virtualize, performance-insensitive apps, and then the production apps, the mission-critical applications. We'll talk about three fundamental inefficiencies in the virtualization of mission-critical apps, and some best practices around dealing with them. That said, most of the time today we'll spend on a live demonstration showing the application of these best practices in a real virtualized environment. So first, a little background on the problem. So before virtualization, in the traditional IT world, applications performance was guaranteed by provisioning enough resources, dedicating a whole physical machine to the application, and giving it enough resources to service the peak load. So consider an application that with some headroom requires at peak 16 CPU cores, 8 gigs of RAM, 10K of I/O bandwidth to service the peaks. So this is the machine you provision for it. Of course, the reality is that workloads are bursty, and the average is often 10% or less of the peak. And so dedicating the hardware wastes a great deal of capacity between the average level of utilization and the peaks. So virtualization, one of the key value proposition of virtualization is to resolve this waste by consolidating the workloads onto a single or into shared physical machines. This increases utilization, but it also increases interference amongst virtual machines. And as a result, so it increases interference, and the peaks of the virtual machines, the peak resource requirements can coincide, in which case you have interference. And then in that shared environment, the VMs compete for resources. What does this mean? Well, it means that the hypervisor, VMware, Citrix, Hyper-V, gets the VMs, provides to the VMs the allocation if the capacity is available, but if it's not, then the VMs experience interference, which results in congestion and bottlenecks, delays. And all of this is actually generally okay for performance-insensitive apps, which can tolerate the interference. And this allows simple, low-risk virtualization. But for mission-critical apps who are highly vulnerable to interference, this is a showstopper. And this is indeed what gives rise to this virtualization chasm. So if you consider that virtualization 1.0 is the virtualization of performance-insensitive apps, the low-hanging fruit, the easy ones that gave us the immediate ROI on virtualization, virtualization 2.0 is about virtualizing production or mission-critical applications. And the ROI, on the one hand, the ROI of virtualizing them is much higher than the ROI on virtualizing the 1.0 applications. On the other hand, it's much harder to do this. And so let's take a look at the three key sources of inefficiency. First of all, what's the problem with production applications? Well, the interference between different apps comes from the statistical overcommitment that at any given moment, even though on average there's enough capacity, the app's demands may momentarily exceed the available capacity. And the hypervisors control this interference in using two methods. One is resource allocation to make sure that the apps are not overcommitted, the resources are not overcommitted. And the second is where should the workloads be placed, workload placement. So let's take a look at what a typical recommendation from the hypervisor vendor may be. So this is a particular example from VMware for virtualizing Exchange, but we find very similar things from other vendors and for other mission-critical applications. So for assuring the peak utilization, there's recommended a certain amount of headroom above the peak utilization. And to avoid overcommitment, the rule, and I've highlighted this portion in blue, is the recommendation is to ensure that the total number of vCPUs, virtual CPUs, assigned to all the virtual machines is equal to or less than the total number of cores on the host machine. So let's take a look at what these two rules, at the situation that these two rules create. So the whole the virtualization of mission-critical apps strategy rests on these two rules. One is Rule 1, resource allocations must be sufficient to serve peak demands. And the second rule is that the aggregate allocation, the total allocation, don't exceed the physical machine capacity. So Rule 1 guarantees that an app may get its peak demands if the capacity is available, and this Rule 2 guarantees that the capacity will be available. But let's take a look at what that actually means. That means if VM1 and VM2, these two VMs, each need 4 virtual CPUs, then for virtualizing a production, a mission-critical app, we would need a physical machine with 8 or more cores, 8 or more CPUs. So when I first saw this, I thought I'm not understanding it, or there was a typo, because where's the resource sharing that virtualization promises? And indeed, in these particular cases, following just these rules, there is no resource sharing. Despite this, there's still the other benefits of virtualization: isolation of the different applications, the effort required to set up, configure, back up the virtual machine. So for these reasons, it may still make sense to virtualize mission-critical apps, but you wind up with the same, this devolves into the same low utilization that you had in the dedicated hardware environment. So let's take a look at these the three fundamental inefficiencies when virtualizing mission-critical apps. One, and talk about each one and how to deal with each. One is the over-provisioning inefficiency. Second is the inefficiently packing the workloads on the servers, the physical machines. And third is non-adaptive control inefficiency. So let's consider them and ways to deal with these. So first, on the over-provisioning inefficiency. So we talked about how for many apps, in particular mission-critical apps, the average utilization is 10% or even considerably less than the peaks. And so a way to avoid the waste is to increase the average workload without increasing the reservation by adding low, performance insensitive apps. So you can consolidate spam filter apps, email, print server applications, so applications that don't require reservations. And so this will raise the average utilization without hurting the reservations captured by the mission-critical application. So the best practice here is to maintain a consolidation balance between performance-sensitive and insensitive workloads. So this is smart consolidation. The second source of inefficiency, let's consider this. So this is a very simplified example where we have a physical machine with 16 cores, CPU cores, 8 gigabytes of RAM, and 10K storage IOPS. And then let's consider we're adding virtualized workloads to this environment. VM1 comes along with the requirement for 8 CPU cores, 3 gigabytes of RAM, and so it has room on the physical machine 1. VM2 comes along. VM2 can be placed on physical machine 1. VM3 comes along, and note that it would actually not have room on the physical machine 1 for 2 reasons. One is the CPU requires 7 cores. There's only a couple cores left, 1 or 2 cores left on physical machine 1, and it requires 2 gigs of RAM, and there's only 1 gig left. So for this reason, we might, on an ad hoc basis, put it in a second machine, and as we add more workloads, put them on 3 physical machines. Now, in this environment, with ad hoc work assignment, consider now we get new VMs, VM 7, 8, 9, 10. So note VM 7. Because of its CPU requirements, it won't fit on physical machine 1 and 2, and so we wind up taking VM 7, VM 8, put it on the physical machine on the 4th server, and for VM 9 and 10, we might find room on an existing machine, and sometimes we just provision, for simplicity, a new machine. So the question is, can we do better? And as opposed to ad hoc, one after the other, next work assignment, and the answer is yes. By looking holistically at all of the available resources, all of the requirements for all of the machines, we can actually distribute what was on 5 physical machines onto just 3. So again, this is a remarkably trivial example, but you see that changes in the workload, changes in the utilization may require reassignment of the workloads, and even this trivial example can be very complex. And this complexity just grows exponentially as you add more VMs, as the characteristics of the physical machines vary, as you have a variety of business constraints, and when the workloads, like they are in real life, are very dynamic. So the ad hoc processes, ad hoc workload placement, resource allocation can lead to very costly inefficiencies, and planning and workload placement must consider all of the resources and not just, for example, CPU bottlenecks, because as we saw, at least in a couple cases, there were limitations on the memory or storage I/O. And so this packing inefficiency, a way to deal with that, best practice number 2 that we're suggesting, that's achievable, and we'll show you how, is use improved workload placement algorithms to solve this puzzle of meeting all of the constraints and packing them, all of the workloads as efficiently as possible. It means looking broadly at all the workloads and resources and exploiting all the flexibility that the performance-insensitive apps provide, and taking advantage of the workload troughs. And the third inefficiency in today's environment, in today's mission-critical, the third inefficiency in today's virtualized mission-critical apps is this non-adaptive control inefficiency. Here's an example of an Exchange server where some server apps fire up between 2 and 5 a.m. So there's a high storage I/O activity with a peak of 10, but much less than 1,000 IOPS during the rest of the time. And so what to do in this situation? Well, let's consider this case. You have a bunch of VMs, and a particular workload, call it VM1, needs suddenly more memory, more storage. So what's the way to deal with that? Well, one way, so this VM now has more higher resource requirements. One way to deal with it is to move a VM from one machine to another, so that the new, so that the VM1, where it was on physical machine 1, now has room. So we're on an ad hoc basis move the single virtual machine to make room. But the question is, can we do better? It turns out that by looking at the entire, looking at the holistically at the all the constraints and workload requirements, you can pack it much more efficiently from 4 to 3. And so this idea of looking adaptive control versus set and forget or incremental ad hoc workload placement. The reality is workload demands change over time. And so on the one hand, during the peaks, we may want to have the Exchange server have all of the resources it needs, but reduce the reservations during the day. And static workload management is limited to handling such cases. And adaptive workload control offers much more superior management where you can take advantage of the workload dynamics to both reduce waste and make sure that performance of mission-critical apps doesn't suffer. So the third best practice is to provide adaptive control to managing your workloads to both optimize resources and avoiding performance degrading interference. And a corollary to that is using forward-looking workload projections, so that quite often workload peaks are not random, and they may be daily peaks, weekly peaks, end of month peaks, end of quarter, end of year. There are often regular peaks. So taking advantage of historical peaks and looking forward is another best practice. And together, this overcomes the inefficiency that comes with statically or in an ad hoc basis placing workloads. So the adaptive control to do it manually is practically impossible. It means that system admins need to study in great detail hypervisor and application manuals, manage the interference manually, and in an environment of data center of any size, even a modest data center, it's way beyond what can be done manually, coordinating the workloads as the peaks come. And this complexity is a central barrier for Virtualization 2.0. So let's take a look at the ways to overcome these inefficiencies by taking a look at how with VMTurbo you can do this. The problems that we're addressing is workload placement, eliminating the inefficiency and the complexity. And this can be addressed by eliminating the over-provisioning by smart consolidation of the workloads, minimizing workload packing waste by better bin packing algorithms, and enabling adaptive control to take advantage of the bursty nature of mission-critical apps. So the recommended Virtualization 2.0 strategy is to replace manual management with automated and optimized management of workloads and resources. So that's the setup and preamble for. I'm going to hand control over to my colleague Philip, show how we would actually do this in a virtualized data center.
Thank you, Ilya. I am going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Appreciate all the work you did setting up the audience for me. Thank you. You made my job very much easier. I will be your presenter for the rest of the presentation. My name is Philip Thomas. Just a quick bit of housekeeping so that we can all get along just fine. You are all on mute. I apologize. There are just too many of you to take you off mute, and of course statistically one person is going to put us on hold, and then everyone gets to hear the on-hold music. That all said, this is interactive. I'm going to ask you to participate in some polls, and I have a friend and colleague, Fred Wildman Wild, who is going to be my wingman today. That's him there on the opening slide, who will be batting down the questions as they come along. Feel free to type your questions in real time at the pertinent point that I make, and any clarification that you require, please feel free to type. Fred will answer them for you, and any that we don't get to, we'll spend a little time after the show, and we'll certainly follow up again with any unanswered beyond that. So appreciate your cooperation there. We're right on schedule. It's 25 minutes past, and this portion of the presentation runs approximately 30 minutes. At the end of this presentation, the call to action I would say to you is, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was educational. But I do encourage you to contact us. There's a contact us form on the website that is very easy. You get to specify what type of question you have and how you want to be contacted or not at all. So we do read every one of them, and we action every one of them. So thank you for your time there. Before I jump in, I would like to get all of you involved, and I'd like to ask just a couple of poll questions so that, let's see, polls. Let's pick one just to get this going. And I'd like to start with which hypervisor you're currently using. So please go ahead and just pick up your mouse and just click on the appropriate hypervisor. I think there was another, an other as well. So I think we might have lost that, or I just don't see it on my screen. But I'll just give this a few seconds to run. I apologize if you're an other. If you're an other at this point and there isn't another option, just sit back and relax. You'll have a chance to participate in just a moment. I'm happy to share the results of all of these polls with you. I'll leave it running just a few more seconds, but as predicted, actually only 67% of you have voted. I doubt that 33% of you are using other, but anyway. All right, I'm going to close that off and happy to share the results with you. And as expected, 92% VMware. This is fairly common across the industry, and I do appreciate you sharing that with me, so it gives us a common frame of reference to move forwards. That all said, I'd like to ask you to participate in another poll, and that is beyond the capabilities that come with your hypervisor, and I understand you're looking at vSphere and vCenter. Are you using any other performance enhancement tools? Anything else to optimize the placement of VMs, do predictive load balancing, or any other real-time tool to bat down problems and bottlenecks as they occur? And again, I'm happy to share the results, but I'm fairly confident that all of us could predict the answer, and it's shaping up just as you would expect. We're approaching nearly 60% voted. Just please grab your mouse, go ahead, just click on one of them. I'll just let it run for a few more seconds. Okay, so we're over 70% voting. I'll go ahead and close this out and share the results with you. And as predicted, actually I would have been quite happy to place a bet saying 100% of people aren't using any additional add-on or third-party performance enhancement capability, but we're well over 90%, so that is very typical of the industry. So let's take a look at what we can do to implement the best practices that you would be able to implement regardless of which hypervisor and regardless of which performance guaranteeing tool you care to use. Look, going through Ilya's presentation, I pulled out the 4 best practices. We're going to go through each of these best practices and look at ways of implementing them to ensure or assure best performance of your mission-critical applications. Going through, if we start with best practice number 1, Ilya went through the theoretical presentation of why it's important, but let's look at the conclusion. The conclusion says, maintain a consolidation balance between performance-sensitive apps and insensitive apps. And the reason is that there's actually a benefit to being able to mix and match performance-sensitive and non-performance critical applications and virtual machines. Why? Because in times of need, in times of burst, in times of peak, it becomes possible for the mission-critical applications to borrow resources from the mission-critical applications, albeit at the expense of their performance, but you do that to ensure the continued functioning and the continued performance of the mission-critical applications. The trick becomes to make sure that not all the performance-critical applications are on the same VM, the same physical machine, or the same cluster, so that this can happen, and that you have some way of identifying the mission-critical ones from the non-mission-critical ones. Now I'm going to use this as a segue back to the VM application. I'm going to give you a quick overview of this launching page so that we can go off down the various tangents necessary to show you how to go about doing that for the mission-critical applications. This is your single pane of glass that gives you an overview of the performance metrics of your virtualized environments. I don't have time to go through everything, but there is a little inventory on the left-hand side of the screen that keeps track of your virtual machines, the physical machines, the storage silos that are being used to support those, and various other collections such as data centers and so on, as well as, and again I apologize for not having time to do this, the various additional groupings that we can create that enables you to provide monitoring capability to other groups of people. Perhaps you're reselling this as a software as a service provider. Perhaps you're looking to optimize within just a particular group or cluster or data center. Regardless, the two left-hand panels are there to enable you to do that. Probably of most importance is this heat map. This heat map is your air traffic controller's guide to the functioning health of your virtualized environment. At its base is the health of the physical machines. I happen to have a number of real servers running here, and alongside each of the server names we can see the 9 metrics that we are managing and monitoring and optimizing for holistically, as well as the 10th rolled up metric. It's important to note that of these 9, we are monitoring all of them and using all of these in the calculations that we perform to ensure optimal efficiency of your environment. The heat map, running from light blue, critically underutilized, to red, critically overutilized, gives us immediate feedback as to the health of or resource scarcity of any of these metrics that may unwantedly contribute to a degradation in performance of our customers, the virtual machines that are being hosted here. Now, fortunately, nothing has manifested itself here, and an analogy in your environments would be no alert or signal of anything awry. But already we can see that we have some red areas. Taking a look at this CPU utilization for server HP ESX13, we can see that we have a very high utilization in excess of 90%, and that is manifesting itself currently as a low availability of a 4 CPU ready state for symmetric multiprocessing applications or other multi-threaded applications. It's very important in your environment, especially when you're trying to prioritize for mission-critical applications, that you don't let a performance bottleneck manifest itself and go unaddressed before it impacts the performance of the virtual machines. A very cool tool, a very cool capability within the VMTurbo application is this window. It's called a problem log. The sad thing is it's anything but a problem log. It's actually the solution to any bottleneck that comes up. Check this out. I'll go ahead and maximize this window so that we can see those. And immediately, in real time, we have the top, I think that's the top 10 are listed here, resolutions to performance issues that have manifested themselves. Notice that the issues span a broad spectrum of environmental conditions that we would like to change. There's a high CPU utilization that I mentioned just a moment ago. There's a ready queue congestion. There's a storage balance issue. There's an underutilized server, and there are various load balancing issues. And we can take a look at any of these, but before we do so, remember this machine that had a high CPU utilization? One of the tools that sysadmins like is the ability to slice through the data available and say, for this particular physical machine, what are the virtual machines that I'm supporting? Because these are the machines that would most readily be impacted by this bottleneck. Each of these virtual machines is listed here with the various metrics here, the memory, the CPU, the latency, the disk IOs, and so on, that aggregated represent the resource consumption of that physical machine, and very easily we can identify the fact that that aggregated consumption of the CPU is very high. Remember those problem resolutions you saw on the main overview screen? Those are duplicated here so that I could identify just those resolutions that apply to this specific machine if I was trying to troubleshoot this specific machine. That's not really the best way to go about it, because it's much better to look at this holistically. Here are the highest overall problems and resolutions. Drilling down into the problem, we can see how the aggregated CPU consumption leads to a high utilization index, and immediately accessible is the resolution that would most impactfully change that situation. In this case, it happens to be a move. Now, there are many optimization type applications on the market that say they will do intelligent moving. I'll show you why in a minute that that's not actually the case. But for now, just say, look, here one resolution is a move of this virtual machine from this location to this actual location, and here it's asking for me to confirm that. Now, I say that because the VMTurbo application can run in an automatic mode or a manual mode, and I'm running in manual mode because if it was running in automatic mode, none of these problems would exist. The point here is that the system is proactively intervening to offer you, and in some cases enact on its own, those resolutions that would most impact the performance of your virtualized environment. This means that you can scale your virtualized environment without scaling along with it the man-hours needed to continually maintain it. So that's one aspect of being able to keep those virtualized, those mission-critical applications running optimally. Just to show you that we do a lot more than just make recommendations for the moving of virtual machines. Here we can see a storage allocation issue that can be remedied by changing the storage silos applied to particular virtual machines. Here is a green-it recommendation that actually says that we have the capacity to vacate this machine and power it down if we so wish. Now, this is only a suggestion. I've spoken to a number of customers who said, you know what, I might during the day just want to keep that server online so I can spread the workload across it and get the maximum possible performance. And maybe at night, go ahead and have a rule that would aggregate the virtual machines to fewer servers so I can power them down so I have less power consumption. That's a direct dollar cost saving, as well as lower maintenance hours, spares, cooling, etc., etc. So it's nice that that is one of the resolutions available. So now that I've introduced you to this overview and the concept of being able to bat down problems as they exist, let's take a look at another facet of making sure that mission-critical applications have the resources available to run. One facet of that here in the VMTurbo tool is the right-sizing capability. The right-sizing capability in the VMTurbo tool application is the ability to go back through and mine the historical data collected, remember those 9 parameters, and look for the peak utilizations and make a determination based on that of what is a realistic right-sizing recommendation to be able to provide the resources necessary for optimum performance, but make sure also that any resources not being used are available elsewhere. And these recommendations span a variety of metrics, from an increase or a decrease in the virtual memory, increase or decrease in the virtual CPU applications, and so on. And what's nice about this is that in addition to that window, I have the ability to generate in real time or on a scheduled basis a report that can be emailed to various stakeholders that includes not only the information you saw a moment ago, but also the dollar cost saving or the dollar cost of actually increasing the resource allocation. And this is important to know if you are looking to provide some sort of a dollar reconciliation against resources consumed. So that is the second aspect of that virtual, the mission-critical application prioritization. The third aspect is the ability to actually say, look, some of these applications are more important than others. And now I suppose is a good time to introduce you to how some of our algorithms work. There is a concept that we call the market. The market is a financial transaction conducted between the virtual machine and the physical machine. Think of the stock market. The price of stocks rise and fall, and you as a consumer choose when to buy that stock and when to sell that stock. The virtual machines in the VMTurbo managed environment are making those same decisions. They have a budget from which they must purchase the resources necessary for them to run. If you have a lot of budget, you can purchase better resources, even as their price increases. Why would a price increase? It might increase because a resource becomes more scarce. Think of a run on a particular stock, a shortage. The price goes up. It would be nice to be able to say that mission-critical applications have a higher budget and therefore a higher ability to purchase those resources. If I'm a lesser important application and I am being squeezed because the price is rising and I cannot afford to stay in a high-performing physical machine or utilizing a high-performing or high-capacity storage device, I will move out. That is, a virtual machine deciding for itself to up and move to a new location. That is the essence of the marketplace that runs continuously in our environment. Now, that was a necessary preamble to tell you about the budgeting available to the various tiers of performance. Here I've created 3 performance tiers. This is actually an in-development interface. The mechanism already exists in VMTurbo. We're just coming up with a prettier interface for you. And I have created 3 performance tiers. Customer-facing applications that are the most critical. Think of web servers, think of any sort of credit card over the web type transaction that must have an immediate response time. Behind that, I've created a tier that represents corporate production environment and business systems. Here I've created a tier that is going to host production SQL servers. And then finally, the 3rd level tier are all other applications. For each tier, I have the ability to create a number of virtual machines that host those virtual applications, or virtual machines that host the applications that we're wanting to provide the better resources for. And then for each of the virtual machines or category, some of the contention policy resolutions. Now, it might be a decision to just keep chugging along, don't worry about it. Or it might be a decision to keep moving, but to move to a lower tier application. Here representing being squeezed out of some of the better performing resources because my actual performance level isn't as important as to keep moving. And then, of course, if it's a non-mission critical application, meaning a very low level, I might choose to suspend my operations until the cost of the resources, brackets availability of resources, returns to a level that I can afford. And all of these decisions might be based on a time function. For instance, I might choose during the nighttime to simply suspend my operations if it's not necessary, or actually more strictly speaking the opposite. During the day when there's the highest demand on the resources, I might choose to suspend my operation and at night return to my dutiful work of whatever I'm doing. Or during the day it might be most important that I keep running. So what we're really doing is enabling the ability to say for each particular machine at each particular level to say what is important to it. Now, for the highest level of performance intensive applications, I would need to create a group, and their only goal in life is to keep running, and they will have the highest budget to buy the highest performing resources. That was a long way of getting to that statement. The statement is the ability to mix and match in the same physical environment those virtual machines, brackets applications, that have higher and lower utilization needs. Remember, if I put them all in the same bin, I create problems. If I mix and match them, I have the ability to share the resources and reprioritize the resources. And if anything, based on that schema goes awry, I have the ability to bat those down with the pre-active bottleneck resolution capability here in the VMTurbo monitor. So that was best practice number 1, create a consolidated balance between performance-sensitive and insensitive workloads. With that said, I would like to go ahead and create a poll, or run a poll, to get your feedback on a number of issues. And I'm just going to launch the poll and just say to you, hey, now that you've seen that, do you agree that being able to prioritize mission-critical and non-mission-critical applications are important? So switch back to the window that I'm running in. Bear in mind that I can see who is attentive and who isn't. Stop surfing the web and reading your mail. And just take a moment and click through just so we can share the results with everyone. We're at about 1/3 of the people voted, rapidly rising, 40%. I'll let it run just a few more seconds. And just while people are voting, take a look at the questions. It looks like Fred is batting them down nicely. I'll go ahead and close this, 3, 2, 1, and share the results. Look, it doesn't take a genius to figure out, of course it's important to be able to prioritize the mission-critical applications and run them in an environment mixed with the non-mission critical. Just makes perfect sense. So thank you for doing that. So what is best practice number 2? Best practice number 2 was the improved workload placing algorithms. Remember, Ilya showed you the example with the Tetris pieces that he stuffed into the box. Actually, that problem is much harder because those Tetris pieces change size and they pulsate because the resource requirements of each of those VMs changes over time. Now, there are probably 3 algorithms out there in the marketplace that are being used. 2 are very common, and 1 is highly sophisticated. Let's take a look at the first 2. I refer to the first one as the next process, where you take VM1 and put it in PM1, VM2 and put it in PM2, VM3 put it in PM3, VM4 goes back to PM1. So virtual machine 4, we look back to see if it'll fit in the first physical machine. Either it does or it doesn't. If it does, it goes in. If it doesn't, we move on to the next machine and try that. And we repeat until we can't place any more, or hopefully they're all placed. This is horribly inefficient. This is actually why most people's virtualization efforts stalled out at about 30%, and that's fairly common across the industry. And that is where we're drawing the line of Virtualization 1.0. There was no way to increase the utilization of the physical servers because that algorithm was horribly inefficient. The second algorithm is what I call the permutations and combinations. Look, the solution to this problem is horribly complex. The resource demands change over time. There are many metrics. Look, I pointed to 9 that we monitor, and there are many applications that monitor far fewer. It's actually something called an NP-complete problem. If any of you are math majors, please feel free to go to wikipedia.com, type in NP-complete, and begin an interesting read about the complexity of solving this problem. Well, I've actually already hinted to you as to what the solution to that problem is. The solution to that problem is something called the marketplace. Remember, each virtual machine, depending on the priority of the applications it's hosting, has a different budget. Each machine constantly, not once every 10 minutes, not once an hour, not once a day, constantly shops. Am I getting value for money for my budget? And any time the price of the resources being consumed rises to a point where the machine decides it's not worth it because it's not that important or it doesn't value that particular resource that highly, has the option to pick itself up and move it to a new location. This is the third algorithm. This is not next, next, next. This is not combinations and permutations. This is a real-time marketplace. Think of the stock market. Now, what you see here in these two windows is the current on the left and the possible on the right. Let's take a look at this. Here are all the physical machines, and they are consuming resources based on the virtual machines in residence. This particular physical machine has a CPU utilization in excess of 90%. Now, please don't think this is a threshold-based system. We're just saying that this is uneven because there are many machines with a much lower utilization level. And here we can see the other contributing resource consumptions, memory, CPU, IOPS, ballooning, swapping, 1, 2, and 4 CPU ready states. What we see here on the right-hand side of the screen is the possible optimized allocation of resources based on that market. The market is turned off right now. If it was turned on, these two would be the same because there would be balance between where we are and the optimal allocation of the virtual machines. There might be a slight lag as a virtual machine looks to see if the price of resources are too high yet or during the actual relocation. But what's important is the end result of this is the fact that the relocation takes into account the cost that will be charged once a virtual machine arrives. This prevents vMotion sickness, where look, 100% of you are using VMware, where a mechanism within vSphere or vCenter would say this particular virtual machine has tripped the threshold and therefore I need to relocate it. It takes the worst offending virtual machine, picks it up and relocates it to another location. That is a threshold response. This is an optimized marketplace. And the changes that would be made in order to reach this optimized, equalized environment, and look, we're going from CPU virtualizations in excess of 90% to none over 80%. The changes required to do that are listed here. There are various configuration changes where we might choose to reconfigure a virtual machine from 4 CPUs to 2. There are also storage management changes where we might change the store. Here, recommendation to change from the NFS store to the iSCSI shared store for this machine SUSE 2, as well as the relocations that are recommended to balance out the environment. Again, the automatic relocation is turned off because I have nothing to show you. It is this ability to relocate based on the consumption of individual resources that enables the high priority applications to continue to have access to the resources it most needs. Without this marketplace, you're looking at two far more primitive methodologies and algorithms for allocating virtual machines. And without that ability to prioritize the resources, you don't differentiate between those machines needing the high-performing physical resources and those that don't. That optimization capability is invaluable for affecting best practice number 2. Let's have a quick look to make sure Fred's keeping up with the questions. Looks like he's doing a good job. Let's throw out another poll. Let's just take a look at the right sizing. I started off the optimization spiel by saying, look, it was important to be able to right size to ensure that we weren't overly allocating resources. And I'm just asking which of you, basically I think I'm asking which of you do this. I think all of you appreciate that it's important, but let's see which of you do that. And look, quite predictably, oh, actually a little bit surprising. I'll let it run for a few more seconds. We're about 60% voted. Okay, I'll go ahead and close this in 3, 2, 1, and I will share it. Actually, I'm wrong. I would have said that 100% of you would say that it was important and that you did it. And honestly, 20% of you are saying, you might be saying, look, I realize it's important, but I'm not doing it. It's nice to be able to get that right sizing recommendation and that nice report that had the dollar cost saving or cost as a result of doing that. So thank you for taking part in that poll. Let's see if there's another one I might choose. Remember this tab in the VMTurbo application? I'd like to ask you if you think it's important to have the ability to be using an application that will automatically and preemptively bat down any of the problems that manifest themselves in the physical machines before they manifest themselves in the virtual machine. Just go ahead and have a quick click. I'll let this run for about 10 more seconds. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, I'll go ahead and close this, and I'll share the results with you. Look, 90% of you are saying, yes, it's important to have a capability that will preemptively bat down performance issues before they manifest themselves in the virtual machines. Fairly easy there. Okay. Let's take a look at the next best practice. Best practice number 3 was provide adaptive control to optimize use and avoid interference. Remember, really, I gave the example of the Exchange server that he said was active through the night, but low use during the day. I might argue that between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m. an Exchange server might have the highest utilization. But in each of your industries and in each of your companies, you can think of applications that go through a cycle. If you're dealing with financial institutions, you might have a 4 o'clock reconciliation when the market closes. If you're running a production environment, you might have an overnight or database backup, like your SQL Server or Oracle database might go through a backup cycle. You might have end of week, end of month, or end of quarter reconciliations to prepare sales reports. In those cases, those applications and virtual machines hosting them will go perhaps from a high CPU utilization mode to a high disk I/O mode, and you would want to be able to reallocate the machine. What best practice number 3 is saying, it would be nice to be able to predict that. It would be very nice to be able to say that during 10 minutes before midnight, I know that this machine is going to go into a high disk I/O mode and that we need to move this machine or give it an opportunity to move, which we would do by raising the price on IOPS and disk access, prior to it going into that mode. The system would raise the price of that resource. The virtual machine would say, I have plenty of money because I am a mission-critical application, and I choose to move to this machine that has fast disk access with high bandwidth. That ability is another critical aspect to enabling mission-critical applications to relocate themselves and offer optimal performance. Fantastic. The next best practice is the ability to create forward-looking projections. That is to say, look, your system's administrators for the most part. Think of the number of times your boss comes to you and say, do we have enough hardware? And you'll probably get to say yes because nothing's fallen over yet and you're managing the plate spinning activity. But can you say the same thing for a week, a month, or a quarter in the future? Moreover, how many times has someone in your department come to your department and said, next week I'd like you to spin up 20 more of these, 100 more of these. We're acquiring a new company and we would like you to host their 100 virtual machines, their 1,000 virtual machines. Or the dreaded, we are going through a budgetary projection for next year. Would you please tell us if you need any more hardware for next year, how much and how much will it cost? Those are critical questions, the answers to which come from the ability to create a forward-looking planning scenario. I'd like to show you how you would go ahead and do that. In this particular scenario, I'd like to create a scenario called 1 week. This is just 1 week from now, and I'm going to take a group of virtual machines. Let's take my production cluster. And I'm going to create a forward-looking projection. Why is that important? Well, running now is not that important, but what if the trending for these machines was going up because we deployed a VDI application or a set of suite of applications that people are using more and more of? Wouldn't it be nice to be able to say, I would like to take a data sample. We'll go from the 15th of February to the 15th of March, and I want to use that trending and peaking to look 1 week in the future. I could look 1, 2, 3 weeks, a month in the future, etc. So I'll go ahead and load that utilization, and I'll just go ahead and use that trending information, that peaking information, to go ahead and run a forward-looking scenario. So I've got about 20 or so virtual machines. I picked a small amount of data. I want this to run in fairly short order. But what this is going to do is it's going to tell me what the projected needs are. Oh, look. If I told my boss today, truthfully, that 4 physical hosts could host these 27 virtual machines, that would be inaccurate 1 week from now. Now, we've created test loads that will simulate this for us. So please understand that why this is happening in such short order. But look, we're going from 4 hosts to 6 hosts. And in order to be able to accommodate that load, we would need to bring online new physical machines with storage and perform various relocations. And here are the actual forward-looking projections that would be needed in order to, here's the rolled-up utilization index, create this very low utilization index. Into that you should read high performance, by going from 4 physical hosts to 6 hosts. Now, there are various trigger levels that we can set. Look, don't allow a CPU utilization to exceed this. Don't allow a queue state to exceed 50%. If any of you are experts on queuing theory, 50% is actually the ideal queue state. That means that there is always one CPU cycle waiting to be executed on that CPU. This is very cool. Let's go back and create another one where I'm going to take the same scenario and I'm going to say more work, right? We all have more work. I'm going to take that same production cluster. Let's see, let's go to the virtual machines. I'll take the current production cluster. Here's production. Next. I'm going to take that same 1 week forward-looking cycle. I'm going to say change the virtual machines, create a historical projection. I'll go from February 15th to March 15th. The fact that those happen to be paydays have no bearing on why I'm choosing those days. I'm loading a forward-looking projection, and I'm going to add an additional workload. I'm going to add additional virtual machines, and I'll take the cluster. I won't double it. That's a bit unfair, but I'll take this machine and I'll add 5 copies of it. Now I'm ready to run it. This would be analogous to saying you're going to be asked to support this other department's machines. We bought a company. We are anticipating taking on new employees. We're going to spin up these many more virtualized applications because we're moving from a physical machine-based to a virtualized-based. And same thing, it's saying that we can do that with 6 servers, and these are the capacity changes that would need to be made, and these are the workload balancing changes that would need to be made. The really clever one is when I say I'll create a scenario called hardware. I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to take you to the appropriate point. I'm going to take the virtual machines. I'll take my production cluster next, but I want to change the hosts. Yes, I can combine this with forward-looking projections, but what I'm really going to do is to migrate to new hardware and show you here how I might want to evaluate the relative performance of various blade servers, UCS configurations, vBlocks, whatever it is you're looking to do the cost performance analysis for. This is the way to create a forward-looking projection that says if you want to host this many virtual machines this far in the future, this would be the number of this type of server, the number of that type of server, and so on. And the reports that are created enable you to go to your manager or department head or CTO and say, here is the cost of the most efficient scenario of hardware acquisitions that I can minimally run on. Your ability to do that as admins is invaluable. So best practice number 4 was continuous use of a forward-looking workload projection. There you see, a short length of time, how am I doing? I mean, exactly 2 o'clock. I've covered the implementations of the 4 best practices, and I would like to thank you for your time. The call to action is to download a free trial of the VMTurbo application to play with it yourselves, or to contact VMTurbo for your own personalized presentation, or simply a review, an over-the-shoulder look, if you like, by one of our technical experts to look at your environment using the VMTurbo application to see what we could do to increase the utilization of your resources. And I would like to just throw out a couple more polls while I still have your attention. Please take a moment for our statistical analysis. Do you feel that this is a correct approach? Just go ahead and click your opinion so we can record that. I'll leave that open for a few more seconds. I actually have one more poll over this, and I do appreciate you taking the time to answer this, and I'll share the results. As expected, 100% feel that this is the correct way. Thank you. And there's one more. I want to know your opinion as to how much of this you already knew or were already implementing. So please just take a moment. This is the last poll. Your impression of how familiar you already were with those best practices. I'm not going to call you out, and you're free to disagree, but those were 4 that we boiled this down to as being the most critical for maintaining your mission-critical application performance. And I'll leave that running for just a little bit. You're being very honest. I appreciate that. Please, there are just a few of you left to vote. If you'll go ahead and go through and cast your vote, I'll leave this open for 3, 2, 1. I'll go ahead and close it, and I'm happy to share. And look, as expected, look, some of you are probably very senior, very capable, and were already aware of the importance of those best practices, regardless of whether you were implementing them. But, you know, 60+% of you were aware of some of them, and to you, the other concepts might be new, and you might be interested in seeing how you could go about implementing them. So I appreciate your time there. I have enjoyed it. I hope that Fred is keeping up with the questions. In fact, I'm going to take Fred off mute. Douglas, if you're still there, could you take Fred off mute to see if he wants to talk about any of the things he's observed with the questioning? Fred, you've been very patient and diligent wingman. Have you seen any issues that you might like to address come through the question board?
Hi, it's Fred. Yeah, one question we had was about the comparison of how this operates with respect to DRS. I hope everybody got a chance to see that answer. We get to ask that a lot. We think the tools are actually complementary. Can everybody see that answer? Well, I guess people can't respond and say yes, but hopefully you can see it. Is it visible to everybody?
It is not, Fred. So how would you characterize, you said it would coexist. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Sure. We recognize that some of the rules that you would put into DRS are important. We actually import those DRS rules. In terms of actually recommending or even automating moves with regard to changing where workload is placed, we have seen that our algorithms are better than what DRS suggests, and the reason is pretty clear, which is that we are taking all these different metrics into account and using the algorithms to have a balanced way of making the move, and then also looking at the move given the model of what we've collected and know about the VMs, the hosts, and being able to predict what the performance is going to be once that move occurs. So you won't find this particular solution making a move based on a threshold of memory or CPU and having that inadvertently result in some other problem occurring that was taken into account.
And you're absolutely right, and I alluded to that when I was looking at the optimizer that said, look, this this runs underneath the radar of any monitoring hypervisor, because we're not responding to threshold violations. We are showing the truly most optimized possible configuration, and hopefully that has never triggered a threshold violation that invites a response from the host hypervisor. So thank you.
The advantage of the engine underneath is that we're able to actually do the move before we actually do the move and see what the results is, given all the information we've collected.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Fred. I appreciate that. Thank you. We're actually over our time. I thank you all for your time. I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen and change the presenter back to Douglas.
Okay, let me take myself off mute. Thank you guys so much for the great presentation. I really enjoyed it myself. Like I always tell people, the best part about these webinars is the fact that I get to be an attendee and get to learn just like everyone else. So I really, really enjoyed it. And definitely guys out there listening, if you're still sticking around or listening to on the recorded version, definitely check out what these guys are doing. Head on over to VMTurbo.com and have at it. They have a lot of great resources out there, and of course download the eval and play around with that stuff. So Philip, gang, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. And of course all the attendees out there, thank you for listening to this DABCC live webinar. And we will get the recorded version posted within 2 days, 48 hours is my goal, and if not sooner. So if you enjoyed this, we'll get that out to you via email because you joined the conference, so we'll send that to you. And then also, you know, if you like it, share it with a friend, and definitely stay tuned for additional DABCC webinars in the future. So on that note, we'll go ahead and call this a webinar. Thanks everyone for attending, and thanks VMTurbo guys. I'll just call you that. How's that sound? For the great presentation.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks everybody.